Well, is your child a bully or being bullied? Well, a new law sets out that children as young as 10 face possible imprisonment if convicted of bullying. It also sets out that children don't need consent from their parents to apply for a protection order. 2 learners in Gauteng committed suicide in June and July by ingesting poison following alleged bullying. Dr. Shaheda Omar, director of the Teddy Bear Clinic, joins me now for a discussion around this. Thank you so much, Dr. Omar. Just to maybe set the record straight here when it comes to this so-called new law, it's not really a very new thing in South Africa. This, of course, has been part of the Children's Act, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe let's just clear that first part before we continue.
So I think it's important to understand that, yes, we are regulated by the Children's Act, and the Children's Act looks at the best interest of the child. So protection of children, the right to protection, the right to safety, the right to healthcare, right to education. But if we look at the South African Schools Act, which has been in existence for a long time, also addresses bullying as one of its issues or challenges faced by children. Then we have the Child Justice Act, and now the Harassment Act, which is looking at the opening of a protection order for children above the age of 10 years. But I think what the important thing to understand here is it's not about putting children into jail or incarceration of children. That is a last resort. Remember, the Children's Act looks at the best interest of the child. So it's not just the best interest of the victim, but also what is in the best interest of the bully. Because we know that bullies come from backgrounds of adversity. It's a cry out for help. It's maladaptive behavior. So there are protocols that are in place that need to be adhered to in order to ensure that both victim and victimizer get an opportunity for intervention, rehabilitation, and reintegration.
And I think let's maybe unpack that because, as a parent maybe listening now who's been in a situation like this, how do you then go about, once the bullies have been reported, or maybe first let's start, where do you first report? You first report to the school, then you go to the police as a last resort. How does this process work?
Indeed. So the important thing is that, yes, as I said, there are procedures in place, and the protocol speaks to the reporting of the bullying, of course, within the school structure, where there would be HODs and senior officials that would have to address that. And then, of course, an investigation will then proceed with disciplinary measures, if necessary, to be undertaken. But again, as part of that process, it's also looking at restorative justice. It's not looking at being punitive. It's not about being of harmful behavior, but it's about helping and healing both victim and the bully. So I think that is something that one needs to be aware of. However, what we are finding that more than 58% of children are actually victims of bullying. And a lot of the children are afraid to come forward and make a disclosure or even reach out to the educators or within the educational structures. But even going back home and speaking to their parents or disclosing the impact or the infliction of violation against them. Children are often afraid to reach out to their parents because of the kind of responses that may be elicited. And that is something that often does not happen. So again, if that, what we find that following this, if the school has failed the child, if the family has failed the child, then the protection order would certainly be the way to go. It's empowering the child, enabling the child to take, some course of action to protect the safety of the child, where the child may not have to go and disclose to anybody or reach out or even suffer shame, humiliation, or any kind of secondary victimization or trauma. So the child would then be in a position to get the necessary protection order in place to prevent any further victimization or harm.
I want to talk about the part where, the victim, very important to talk about the victim as well, but I want to talk about the actual bully as well. But before I get to that, I think it's something we also need to maybe clear and clarify here is the fact that, what does this exactly mean? Because we've seen the headlines, we've seen you can send your bullies to jail now. I mean, if you read that headline only and you don't read any further, it might sound like, you can send a kid as young as 10 years old to Pollsmoor prison, for example. But that's definitely not the case. So maybe let's just, clear that part of what does it mean you can send a bully to jail.
So I think just for everybody to understand, there's the Child Justice Act, which speaks to children coming into conflict with the law. And the Child Justice Act focuses on restoration or restorative justice, and it looks at giving children a second chance in life, diverting them away from the criminal justice system. So, preventing the victimization by law enforcement, appearing in court, brutal interrogation. And I think this is something that needs to be considered, that children are not going to be just thrown into prison or thrown into jail and be subjected to punitive measures. The important thing here is about looking at how best to heal. So there are baby steps, preliminary assessments to take place to look at the pattern, duration, frequency, and severity of the behavior. What kind of intervention would this bully need? What kind of intervention is necessary? Is it community-based care, that the child remains in the care of the parents or family, or if it is medium or severe offenses, then the child would have to go into a special facility. So one needs to look at the context and contextualize. And again, the key factor here to look at is what would be in the best interest of that child.
And at what point are the parents liable for their child's actions when it comes to especially the bully?
So firstly, I also want to just make clear that the age of criminal capacity within the Child Justice Act is 12 and above, meaning that the child must have a reasonable ability to distinguish between right and wrong, so the level of maturity, and that would be difficult to prove. However, when we talk about the liability of parents, when a case has been reported and there's been repeated or repetitive and compulsive and compelling behavior, and parents have dismissed or discounted and have not, responded appropriately or adequately in terms of intervention, in terms of appropriate measures to be followed through, then parents would certainly be held liable for failing. So that would be under the Children's Act, not responding to looking at the best interest of the child and looking at the best interest of all children. So, there would be purposeful negligence. And that would also speak to the fact that the child is at a risk to himself and a risk to others.
And Dr. Omar, we know with the advancements of the technology, bullying has taken a whole different approach as well. So when it comes to cyberbullying, how does this apply?
Well, the same thing, one needs to look at the act and look at the intent behind the act. Is the intention to harm the victim? So one looks at the power imbalance, the performance, the kind of behavior, and as I mentioned earlier, the pattern of behavior. So, of course, consequences would be the same, for physical violation and violence, and even the cyberbullying, where the intention is to injure the child psychologically, mentally, the gaslighting, all that takes place. The information that is placed on social media platforms, as we have seen in many cases where there have been attempted suicides, depression, children who have suffered brutally as a result of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying may not be as tangible and visible, but the impact is devastating and definitely impacts on the well-being and trajectory of the child.
All right, thank you so much. That was Dr. Shaheda Omar, Director of the Teddy Bear Clinic, just on these new laws when it comes to where you can send your bully to jail. That's what the headlines are saying. So definitely something worth watching as a parent when it comes to these new laws.